This is Dennis Ramundi. I'm here with my co-host, Phil Goldberg, author of American Veda. Our podcast, Spirit Matters, found at spiritmatterstalk.com. Our focus, contemporary spirituality. And our guest today, Jai Uttal. He is a world music pioneer. He has performed worldwide, thrilled and enlightened audiences. I've spoken to a number of people that have heard your concerts, and it's not only an enjoyable experience that people often get from music, but most say it's very spiritual in its nature. So thank you so very much for coming on. And I also wanted to mention your new album, Roots, Rock, Rama. So we'll also be discussing that today. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Jai, let's begin with a little background for the people who might not be familiar with you and your work.
Okay.
How did you come to the study of and performance of first Indian classical music and then a kirtan? And just give a little background for how it all came to be.
Well, I grew up in New York City. I'm 65 now, so I grew up, as a teenager in the 60s in New York. And I was playing music since I was a very young kid. But when during the 60s, I got really, really into Beatles and, the whole hippie flower child side of the hippie culture. And, I got somehow or another, I was very drawn to everything Indian. I don't exactly know why. People use the word samskars, which means impressions from previous lives. I don't have recollections of that, so I can't say for sure. But just something awoke in me, and I was listening to a lot of albums, whatever albums I could find. Ali Akbar Khan a lot, and Ravi Shankar, and also folk music albums from India, which were few and far between, but I managed to get them. And, so I was working on all this and really, getting into it, but with my guitar. But then when I went to college in Oregon, Reed College, then the evening before my very first classes, Ali Akbar Khan performed. Ustad Ali Akbar Khan, for those of you who don't know, he was considered the modern master of Indian classical music. He's the elder to Ravi Shankar, and he died about 5 years ago. And I studied with him on and off for 40 years, approximately. So anyway, at that moment, that ended my my college career. So I stayed at college for like a couple of months, failed music and failed religion, and left Oregon and came to the Bay Area to study with Ali Akbar Khan. And so from then on, it was such an absorption in raga and tala and in the ancient devotional songs that he would teach us. Meanwhile, somewhere around the same time, I got involved with a yoga group who, along with asana and meditation and pranayama, taught us all kinds of very simple kirtans, different prayers to different gods and goddesses. And I loved it. And so gradually I started bringing together both the classical music that I was learning from Ali Akbar Khan, the simple kirtans that I was learning, as well as the music that I grew up with, the pop music and soul music and R&B. My father was in the music business, so my whole life, we were immersed in whatever was a hit at that time. And there you go. So then, years and years and years have gone by, and my music has changed always, and I hope it always changes. But the mantra and the devotional aspects of it have been pretty much a constant since I was quite young.
Right. Jai, I had the pleasure of meeting Ali Akbar Khan back in the 70s. He gave a concert at Maharishi University back then, and I was on faculty, and I got to speak with him and hear him perform, and he was amazing. But I actually almost saw him as not only a musician, but sort of like a guru, like a teacher of spirituality on a very high level. And I'm wondering, when you studied with him, was it just about technical training music, or was he teaching you spirituality? And did he give you a mission, or did he inspire you to do something with your music other than just entertain people?
Um, that's a beautiful question. For Ali Akbar Khan, there was no difference between music and spirituality. To him, music was, is a path to the divine, and every note was a precious footstep toward that uh, infinite light. So he didn't. Ali Akbar Khan didn't give lectures or classes about spirituality, but there was a sense with him that, because he could be very irreverent, and he was like just a trippy, amazing guy. But the practice of music was totally sacred to him, and I think that, no, I wouldn't say he gave me a mission, but he was completely, his mission was to imbue into all of his students that understanding of the precious sacredness of every note and of every phrase and of every melody. Um, he would sometimes actually joke a little bit about kirtan because it was so simple, and he was teaching us the subtleties, the ancient yoga of sound and of melody. Now, when I first went to India in 1971, I met a man named Neem Karoli Baba, who was and is considered a great saint and a great siddha, and we called him Maharaji. And in his temples, there was always kirtan going on, and still is to this day, even though he died in 1973. And the kirtan that I would hear there was breathtakingly beautiful. The singers, I don't know if they were trained classically, but they were immersed in the ancient raga tradition, and they were singing the repetitive mantras of kirtan. So it kind of showed me that though the practice itself is quite simple, the musical content of it can be very, 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 very deep. And so, the mission initially, all my music has been about my own self-healing. But gradually through the years, it was a very slow process. I began to be made aware that what I was doing was really, really helping other people. And at first I couldn't, absorb that information at all. It went right over my head. I couldn't let it in. But slowly I have, in a very, I feel, humbling way, I feel that to be true now. And so I don't like to use the word mission because it sounds so big.
Mm-hmm.
But I do feel my own awareness of my own work has changed a little bit from deep self cathartic healing to a sense of service and giving to others. And that's been a gradual process, but it's a beautiful process. And yeah.
And that would be very consistent with Neem Karoli Baba's emphasis with his students.
Yeah, it was
the service part of it.
Right.
Yeah, always. He said, "Well, what good is a ritual, or like a puja? What good is that when people are starving?" He said, he'd always say, "Love people and feed them, and serve God, love people, feed them, remember God." It was very simple, but not simple.
Yeah, right. That's great. Jai, many of the people listening will be familiar with kirtan. That's the sort of ancient and timeless tradition of chanting sacred mantras or names of deities in a call and response fashion. Now, as far as I could tell in your work, you have always done that. And in the kirtan world, where there's so many different musicians, there's been this wonderful, what to me wonderful, sort of fusion of that ancient, timeless tradition and mantras that people don't tamper with, and introducing different musical forms. And in recent decades,
Yeah.
Western instruments, Western, in some cases, rhythms, and so forth. How do you see that integration? And have you ever had people criticize the Western kirtan musicians for doing that?
Well, I'll speak from a personal point of view. From the very beginning, when I got attracted to this, and I guess I could just say enchanted by the practice, I was from the get go. I was experimenting with different kinds of music that could be used to to support the practice of the mantra singing and the call and response aspects of that. And so, but in traveling around India, even from North India to Bengal to South India, the musical styles, ancient traditional musical styles are very, very different, and the mantras are the same. Right. And I got to see that even in the true tradition, the aesthetic calling of each musician, of each singer, and the desire to express oneself in one's unique way is completely a part of the tradition. Because in bhakti, which is roughly translated as devotional yoga, but that's a whole other subject. But the personal prayer and call and emotion and mood of each person is what is expressed in their song and in their prayer and in their singing. So, I from the very beginning felt permission to experiment, not to experiment with the words, because and people do experiment with the words, and I'm always urging them not to, because the mantras are that's a science that goes back before time, and we're not educated enough to even begin to mix and match in that sense. But I very early was felt like I had the permission to explore the music. So I think from my very first album, I didn't sing that much at first, just because on my albums, I mean, because I was like super shy, and gradually, as I evolved and as my music evolved, it became pretty much all about the singing. But every single album from the very beginning, I've experimented with so many different kinds of music, because I also feel like I'm a student of music and a devotee of music, and that goes also back to Ali Akbar Khan, who, although he was a total traditionalist, he encouraged us to become devotees of music, of of melody, of rhythm, and to follow that where it leads. And now, as far as have I ever gotten criticized for it, or have I ever heard criticism about it? Mostly myself. Mostly, I've had such positive response and feedback from the Indian community at large. I won't necessarily say that's true for every singer. I can't say it. I don't know, but it's just been super, that aspect of it. I remember in 1998 or 1999, something like that, I was invited to sing at the Miss India beauty pageant in India. And that was like a really crazy event. It's not what you would call a spiritual event, but
was it sponsored by Donald Trump?
No. India is very big on beauty pageants, and I found when I got there, well, a couple of things. But one thing I found was that my music at the time was really big in the fashion industry there, and they used it for fashion shows and stuff. But the reason I bring it up was because after my performance, I so many people came up to me, like from old people to young, kind of hip, urban, almost punky kind of people, to tell me that from listening to my music, they were brought back to their roots.
Mm.
That they had become separated from their own traditions, because it was boring and it was grandpa and grandma. But then they would hear me doing it in my own, I think with a great respect and understanding of the tradition, but also with my own sounds and my own approach. And I got so much affirmation from that trip that I was on the right path because, financially I was like less than broke. And I began to, have doubts about was there any value in what I was doing.
Mm.
And so that was really, really, really a great trip.
Johnny, I wanted to
Yeah.
ask you in terms of roots, what was your own spiritual, religious upbringing, and how did your friends, family react to your direction, spiritual direction with music?
Well, my family was Jewish. Um, I think it was more ancestral / social than actually spiritual.
Hmm.
But I was raised in the Jewish tradition and a bar mitzvah, and we went to synagogue and stuff. But I never liked it. It never appealed to me. And then when I first went to India, my parents thought I was insane. Um, I came back wearing a dress. I probably was insane. um, but as the years progressed, they became they went through a lot of changes too, of course. But by the end of their lives, they were so supportive and appreciative of what I was doing. And I guess they understood that there's nothing else I was gonna do or knew how to do, so they might as well get on board.
That's great. Jai, we're talking about a lot of the different influences musically and spiritually that you've had. And in looking at your bio, there are two influences that really stood out for me. Excuse me. One was Don Cherry. Excuse me. And people who don't know Don Cherry, he was, or I don't know, I think he's no longer with us, but
Oh no, he died quite
yeah,
a while ago. Yeah.
yeah, but he was a really out there jazz improviser and a horn player, and what strikes me is because when I was young and pretending to be hip, I actually saw him perform in Greenwich Village, and I remember thinking, wow, I just can't deal with this. But so it was very free form as I understand it, and yet Indian music is extremely disciplined. So
Mhm.
how do you see the influence of that he had on you?
Well, Don, rather than calling him an influence on my music,
Uh,
I would have to say that he was a friend and a supporter, and I mean, like a cheerleader, so to speak, for me
uh, uh,
personally. And by playing on my first album, I paid him a little bit, but really it was a gift of his energy and his time and his musicality, and it really helped me to get noticed from the very, very beginning.
uh,
Don was an amazing guy, and you know, free avant-garde jazz. I was really into it for a while before I got so into Indian music,
uh,
and then once I got into Indian music, uh, yes, as you said, the discipline and the super attention to intonation and the almost chemical formulations of the ragas just pulled me into a different place. But Don Also, somewhere along the line, uh, developed a real strong spiritual practice. He was initiated by some great Tibetan Buddhists,
Mm.
and he went to India to study classical raga.
Wow.
And one of his teachers was also one of my teachers, a man named Z.M. Dagar, who was a Veena player, who was just like one of the greats, also no longer with us. So Don and I, aside from just like a beautiful affinity, we had a real commonality in our language and in where, in our intentions and our endeavors. And he was really trying to bring some of the qualities of Indian music into his jazz world.
Mm.
And then, he's such a sweet guy. He was such a sweet guy, and also troubled, drug addiction, and
Mm.
he had some troubles. And he told me that his playing on my first album was his last, what he considered really good playing, because he had trouble with his teeth. So playing the trumpet
Oh boy.
became more and more, almost impossible toward the end. So I consider him a great friend and a great ally and a beautiful spirit.
Dennis, could
Um,
I ask a
Go
follow-up
ahead.
question? The other influence that you mentioned in your work was the Beatles, and there are a couple of things that stood out for me. One was when I was listening to the new album, to Roots Rock Rama. Suddenly, on one piece, you broke into Help,
yeah.
and I loved that, and I thought, well, that's perfect because it was while making the movie Help that George Harrison discovered the sitar. So there's the Indian influences there, somewhere, just for that reason. But tell us about the Beatles, and because it also says that a lot of the tracks from the White Album were among the influences on your new album.
Well, Phil, yeah, you're the Beatles scholar, but I just ordered the new deluxe package of the 50th anniversary of Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club
Oh
Band.
wow!
So you got
67, yeah.
you got to get
Wow.
that. Um, but anyway, I from the very beginning, I'm a Beatle maniac, that passion for the Beatles has never died. And in fact, just last month, I spent a lot of time in Rishikesh. We filmed a music video, and a lot of it was filmed at the Beatles ashram.
Oh
Well,
great,
they call
great.
it the Beatles ashram now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I think before, at the onset, whatever the word is, of every album that I've recorded, I'm almost always pull out a Beatles album and listen to it and sort of like study it. I've studied these albums, and not that I ever want to try to imitate, because, well, first of all, that's hopeless, and second of all, well, why would you? But I get so much inspiration from the way they approach their songs, and uh, I think my album Mondo Rama, which also had a Beatles song, and had Tomorrow Never Knows.
Mm.
That album, I was deep into Revolver and just referencing it. Well, if I get stuck in a production, what would the Beatles have done here? And then think of a George Harrison-ish guitar part and just try that. Anyway, for this album, kirtan songs are usually very, very, very long. Certainly in a live setting, there, one song can go on for 45 minutes with the, tempo changes and melodic changes, but still the same thing. And so on my last bunch of albums, I've had very long tracks. This time I was thinking, well, how is it that I can listen to a Beatles song 2.5, 3 minutes long, and when it's over, feel completely satisfied, like just completely full from that song. And why can't we do that with a kirtan song? So that was, I was holding up that as kind of like a challenge for myself. But it wasn't only that. It was also because I had so many songs that I had been singing for quite a few years prior to making this album, and they all were like a piece of the mandala. They were all a piece of the whole, and there was, I didn't record every song that I've written since the last album, but these 12 songs had to be on it. So, I was holding. I didn't get down to 2.5 and 3 minutes, but I I made them much more concise than most people's kirtan albums, and part of that was a reference to the Beatles. I just love the Beatles. I love everything they did, and certainly their journeys to India and George Harrison's journeys into Indian music were very inspiring to me. I saw when the Beatles went to Rishikesh, and I was like pretty young then. I don't know, that I followed that trip long distance wise very closely.
Yeah. Well, the 50th anniversary is coming up
Wow.
in February.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Jai, I wanted to ask you a couple of things. One is, what do you listen to? What kind of music do you listen to? If you have a 2-hour ride and you're going to listen to music, and also, you've performed all over the world. Are there a few concerts that you've given that really stand out as really absolutely special in regard to your own experience?
Uh, um, well, there've been some amazing concerts. I mean, just like experiences in the concerts. So I'll start with your second question first.
Yeah.
I remember there was one concert I did in the Manaus Opera House. The Manaus is a city in the Amazon rainforest in Brazil, and the opera house there was built in the 1800s um, by the rubber barons. The guys, and every bit of that opera house was brought from Europe, and there's some movies about it, and great opera performers were there, and they asked me to. I was in Manaus. It was my first trip to Brazil. I was in Manaus and at a conference from uh, ITA, Transpersonal Association. I don't remember. International Transpersonal Association. I think that's what it was
Sounds
called.
right.
And I was invited to sing at the Opera House, and it was a completely transcendent experience. We didn't even need a sound system there, and it was I don't know. It just well, first of all, it cemented my love for Brazil, which has developed over the years. I'm married to a Brazilian woman, and now my main study musically is Brazilian guitar. But anyway, that was a great concert, and another great concert was when I first went to Israel. I guess it was about 25 years ago. And I performed at a festival called Shantipi, which was an intercultural festival for peace between Israel and Palestine and the world, of course. And that concert was so moving. When I got off stage, I couldn't stop crying. And it was also very surprising that people in the audience there, a large part of them, and there was a couple of thousand people there, knew my songs. That surprised the heck out of me. But I felt when I went to Israel for the first time, just such a connection to my ancient tribe. Really something else. Because, yeah, I mean, and anyway, let's see, others. What was a great event that I will never forget was the first Chant for Change concert in Washington, D.C. It was the eve of the inauguration of President Obama's first term. And there was great, great hope. And there was a belief and a feeling that the spiritual community, the Bhakti community, should and must be present in the world and interact with the world, not retreat from the world. And so it was a full day event. Well, partially it was a celebration of the victory of Obama and what we all hoped would be a new era of sorts. And it was just amazing, amazing, amazing concert. I could sort of go on and on about this, Dennis. I feel
Mhm.
like I was have been so lucky and blessed to have been able to sing and perform and share my music in places where every bit of energy that I put out actually came back to me 100-fold.
Wow.
And of course, I've done my share of, like, I'll never forget with my band, the Pagan Love Orchestra, driving to Santa Barbara to perform at the Santa Barbara Student Union, and there were 3 people in the audience.
Oh,
So,
God.
I've done plenty of those, but I could go on and on about.
That's,
There's one festival that I've played at several times in Sao Paulo, Brazil, called Yoga Pela Paz, which means yoga for peace. And they're not doing it now, but it was a huge, huge free festival in the biggest park in Sao Paulo, where there were some yoga classes and a couple of performances. And I had some of my best friends from LA were with me, and then a bunch of Brazilian musicians were with me, and that was just something else, and it was so great. And then one time I sang kirtan in this little hut in the town very, very high up in the Himalayas called Badrinath. And I was asked to sing, and I was surrounded. There was 1 or 2 Americans, but the rest were really saintly uh, renunciates, men and women who were sadhus and deep on the spiritual path. And they asked me to sing kirtan. And I'll never forget that. That was,
Mhm.
so it's not all about big
Right.
audiences and cool places.
no, well, that is a cool place. That's a very holy place.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And then
Let-
what do I listen to in the car?
All right.
Uh, um, well, I just got Bob Dylan's new album, Triplicate, and I haven't started it yet, but I can't wait to put that on in the car. I listen to a lot of reggae. I go through some periods where I listen to a lot of Bob Dylan. People give me albums to turn me on, and to share their own music with me, and that's usually when I listen to that.
Mm.
And what else is in my car? Oh, so tons of reggae. Oh, Sly and the Family Stone.
Wow.
I have everything that he's done, and a bunch of records of 70s funk that I love, compilations. And back to more Bob Dylan. These days, I haven't been listening to the Beatles, but I'm sure when I get that new edition of Sgt. Pepper's with all the outtakes, that's going to go deep in there for a while. And at home, well, probably 80% of what we listen to is Brazilian music.
Wow.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
that's from the influence of my wife, and I just, it's deeply fascinating, engaging, and I'm, in the process of exploring and discovering and learning that, and it's so great.
Great. Hey, Phil, we have
Now
time
let's-
for one last
Yeah,
question.
I want to talk about the new album.
Yep.
Jai, what can you tell us about Roots Rock Rama and why in the press release does it say that you think it's the completion of a cycle?
Well, yeah, it's funny, you put words to these things, but there's some way in which I feel, and this is a beautiful feeling, but it's a very strong feeling that's kind of ephemeral, kind of hard to describe. But I've been singing kirtan for 50 years, as sometimes very publicly and sometimes very privately. But for 50 years, it's been the kind of root of my spiritual life, which I don't consider different from any other part of my life. It's it's sort of been the foundation of my existence for 50 years. And I feel like in this double CD that I've tried to put all the experiences I've had into these songs and make it kind of like a complete journey through the mandala of devotional moods that I know is just a tiny particle of what the infinite universe of devotional yoga contains. But it's really been my full experience to date. I won't say that contains every musical style I've ever explored, but it sure does contain a lot of them.
Mm.
And side one or CD one kind of reflects the big anthemic festival side of the kirtans that I've developed and worked on for so many years. Very uplifting, dance oriented, very reggae, but not only reggae style kirtans. And CD2 is a much more introverted, um, kind of kirtan, more like what I do in my home, without an audience, without anybody listening to me. And it's very Brazilian, but it's also just very psychedelic and dreamy. And I just these days, with the record business being what it is, I had sort of given up in a kind of a blue kind of way, a little bit of a sad kind of a way, of like ever making an album. Why should I make an album? People don't care about albums. But I couldn't not do it. And then I was like, how can I do it? Because I don't have any money. And these benefactors showed up and said, Jai, you've been part of our life for 20, 25 years. You've helped us through so many different times, your music, that is. And now we want to just give you this gift to finance the album. So there it was. And it could have been a single album. If I cut like 3 minutes off, it could have been a single. But I felt that the moods were so distinct that it would be a much more beautiful listening experience to divide them into CD1, which is called Rama Sun, and CD2, which is called Rama Moon. And again, it's back to albums. I'm sitting here looking at our record player. We have a record player, and there on top of it is a vinyl Abbey Road. And and next to it is Bob Marley's Legend. And those are just the ones that I can see from where I'm sitting. Side A and side B where it was at.
Yeah.
And well, I'm a dinosaur, I guess. I still appreciate that form.
Cycles. Everything comes back to
making new stuff.
There's a lot of young people. There's a lot of young people buying vinyl. Last summer I was in Gothenburg, Sweden. And there was a section of town where there must have been 8 or 9 stores selling nothing but vinyl, and they were loaded with millennials picking up all the classics. It was amazing, and so
they'll all be in Brooklyn soon.
Yeah, they're all in Brooklyn now. I want
to return to Brooklyn. Yeah,
I would love to turn this into a vinyl, but right now, I have to think of finances and business. And I think the yoga community, which I hope it's not limited to, but, I don't think it's a big vinyl community, but world music community might be more. And I hope, the door isn't closed to putting this out on vinyl. The artwork would look so beautiful, in a bigger format.
I was going to say I'm looking at the CD cover, and I was thinking it would really look great blown up into LP size. But we should also mention that for every copy of the album sold, a tree will be planted to combat deforestation around the world.
I'm so glad you remembered to say that. Just this morning, I'm computing how many I've sold so far. It's just been out a couple of weeks, and I'm about to send a check to onetreeplanted.org. I'm so happy and proud, really, to have partnered with them on this. And of course, downloads and streaming and whatnot won't affect that equation. But anyone who buys a CD will know that a tree will be planted.
Great.
That's great.
Jai, thank you so very much for your time today. Again, the album Roots Rock Rama, available, and great luck with that. And I look forward to hearing you perform in person sometime.
And before we leave, please, you do kirtan camps, and perhaps you'd like to let people know about that.
Yeah. For 15 years, I've been leading, along with my wife and some other accompanying musicians, twice a year, a full week of kirtan practice and kirtan sharing and learning about the music. And every winter we do it in a very exotic, cool place. We've done it in India, we've done it in Brazil, we've done it in Guatemala, Costa Rica. This next winter we'll be in Costa Rica. And every summer we do it near our home, and it's usually non-residential. We help people find places to stay. And during the week, uh, will I share everything that I'm able to share with everyone. And my wife teaches, and we do a lot of a lot of kirtan. But I feel the beauty of it is that everybody comes with this intention to heal and open and share their hearts. So it becomes this incredible community of devotion, and we all become we're all teaching each other and leading each other, and it's the greatest. And we have the summer camp is coming on August 8th rather, and it's in Fairfax. I love this because it's 5 minutes from my home.
And we should say that's Northern California, Marin County.
Yeah, there's actually a lot of Fairfaxes in the country. You're right.
Yeah.
But it's just outside of San Francisco. It's close to Berkeley, close to Oakland, and yeah, it'll be a week. And for the summer camp, my good friend, good buddy Daniel Paul will once again be co-teaching. He's a tabla player and a singer. And in the winter camp, Vishwambar from the Mayapuris will be co-teaching with me. He's a mridanga player. And my wife, Nubia Teixeira, she organizes and arranges it and teaches yoga and teaches about all the deities and families of the Indian tradition.
Wonderful.
So it's pretty cool.
Phil,
they're
I'd
great
like
events.
to take it. How about you? I wish I could take the time to do that. It'd be a lot of fun.
Why don't you guys do it?
Hey, who knows? August might be possible. And we'll have that information posted up on our blog at Spirit Matters Talk. So again, Jai, thank you so very much. Keep doing the good work. It's wonderful what you're doing. And we were happy that you took the time to come on, are happy that you took the time to come on.
Well, it's my
what you're doing with
pleasure.
us.
My pleasure. And I really appreciate your inviting me and, supporting what I do. And,
Yeah.
it can't be understated.
Yeah.
Thank you
Great.
so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jai.